On this day in history, September 1st, 1422, after the death of his father, King Henry V, Henry VI succeeds him to the throne of the Kingdom of England. Included in the following is an excerpt from the 1944 edition of the Encyclopedia Britannica going over the history of Henry. Henry VI, born 1421, died 1471, King of England, son of Henry V and Catherine of Valois, was born at Windsor on December 6, 1421. He became King of England on September 1st, 1422, and a few weeks later, on the death of his grandfather, Charles VI, was proclaimed King of France also. Henry V had directed that Richard Beauchamp, Earl of Warwick, should be his son's preceptor. As early as 1423, the baby king was made to appear at public functions and take his place in Parliament. He was knighted by his uncle Bedford at Leicester in May 1426, and on November 6, 1429, was crowned at Westminster. Early in the next year, he was taken over to France, and after a long delay, crowned in Paris on December 16, 1431. His return to London, February 14, 1432, was celebrated with a great pageant devised by Lydgate. During these early years, Bedford ruled France wisely, and first with success, but he could not prevent the mischief which Humphrey of Gloucester caused both at home and abroad. Even in France, the English lost ground steadily after the victory of Joan of Arc before Orleans in 1429. The climax came with the death of Bedford and defection of Philip of Burgundy in 1435. This closed the first phase of Henry's reign. There followed 15 years of vain struggle in France and growing disorder at home. The determining factor in politics was the conduct of the war. Cardinal Beaufort, and after him Suffolk, sought by working for peace to secure at least Guienne and Normandy. Gloucester courted popularity by opposing them throughout, and with him was Richard of York, who stood next in succession to the crown. Beaufort controlled the council, and it was under his guidance that the king began to take part in the government. Thus it was natural that, as Henry grew to manhood, he seconded heartily to the unpopular and difficult peace policy. Henry was unfortunate in his advisers. The cardinal was old, his nephews John and Edmund Beaufort were incompetent, Suffolk was tactless. Suffolk, however, achieved a great success by negotiating the marriage of Henry to Margaret of Anjou in 1445. Humphrey of Gloucester and Cardinal Beaufort both died early in 1447. Suffolk was now all-powerful in the favor of the king and queen, but his home administration was unpopular, whilst the incapacity of Edmund Beaufort ended in the loss of all Normandy and Guienne. Suffolk's fall in 1450 left Richard of York the foremost man in England. Henry's reign then entered on its last phase of dynastic struggle. Kay's rebellion suggested first that popular discontent might result in a change of rulers, but York, as heir to the throne, could bide his time. The situation was altered by the mental derangement of the king and the birth of his son in 1453. York, after a struggle, secured the protectorship and for the next year ruled England. Then Henry was restored to sanity, and the Queen and Edmund Beaufort, now Duke of Somerset, to power. Open war followed, with the defeat and death of Somerset at St. Albans on May 22, 1455. Nevertheless, a hollow peace was patched up, which continued during 4 years with lack of all governance. In 1459, war broke out again. On July 10, 1460, Henry was taken prisoner at Northampton and forced to acknowledge York as heir, to the exclusion of his own son. Richard of York's death at Wakefield, December 29, 1460, and the Queen's victory at St. Albans, February 17, 1461, brought Henry his freedom and no more. Edward of York had himself proclaimed king, and by his decisive victory at Taunton on March 29th, put an end to Henry's reign. For over 3 years Henry was a fugitive in Scotland. He returned to take part in an abortive rising in 1464. A year later he was captured in the north and brought a prisoner to the Tower. For 6 months in 1470 to 1471 he emerged to hold a shadowy kingship as Warwick's puppet. Edward's final victory at Tewkesbury was followed by Henry's death on May 21, 1471, certainly by violence, perhaps at the hands of Richard of Gloucester. Henry was the most hapless of monarchs. He was so honest and well-meaning that he might have made a good ruler in quiet times, but he was crushed by the burden of his inheritance. He had not the genius to find a way out of the French entanglement or the skill to steer a constitutional monarchy between rival factions. Henry's very virtues added to his difficulties. He was so trusting that anyone could influence him. so faithful that he would not give up a minister who had become impossible. Thus, even in the middle period, he had no real control of the government. Religious observances and study were his chief occupations. For education he was really zealous. The planning of his great foundations at Eton, 1440, and King's College, Cambridge, 1441, was the one thing which absorbed his interest. To both, he was more than a royal founder, and the credit of the whole scheme belongs to him. Henry's only son was Edward, Prince of Wales, born 1453, died 1471, who, having shared the many journeys and varying fortunes of his mother Margaret, was killed after the Battle of Tewkesbury, May 4th, 1471, by some noblemen in attendance of Edward IV.